You are listening to Leaders and Legends, a podcast produced by Veteran Strategies and featuring conversations with fascinating and impactful men and women who have shaped our world, our communities, and our history. My name is Robert Bayh, Principal of Veteran Strategies, and your host for our discussion. You are listening to Leaders and Legends, a podcast presented by Veteran Strategies, a local veteran public relations enterprise, and sponsored by Girl Scouts of Central Indiana, Garmond Construction, Leaders and Legends LLC, the Grand Hall and Conference Center at Historic Union Station, the McGinley's Golden Ace Inn, and McAllister Machinery, your friendly neighborhood Caterpillar dealer. You may find all your sales and rental equipment needs at McAllister.com. We are pleased to announce our podcast is now a member of the All Indiana Podcast Network in partnership with Wish TV. You may find Leaders and Legends at allindianapodcastnetwork.com. Thinking of starting a podcast or need to host a public meeting? Let Leaders and Legends LLC be your partner as you look for new ways to communicate your message. Please contact Chris Spangle and me at leadersandlegends.net. Thank you for joining us on the Leaders and Legends podcast. Our guest today is former governor, former United States Senator, I guess I should say former Secretary of State, Mr. Evan Bayh. We are joined by Jim Shella, former political and state house reporter for Wish TV. Governor Bayh, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Robert, it's great to be with you.
Well, I know you got a lot going on, and we're very, very appreciative. First, before we say anything else, on behalf of the podcast, condolences on the passing of your wife, Susan. It was a beautiful tribute that I read about, and I know Jim was there. And so thank you, especially in the time of your grief, to give us an hour or so of your time.
Well, thank you, Robert. It was meant a lot to our family to know that she was loved by so many Hoosiers and people who were at the service and the people who just kept us in their hearts and prayers. That's what gets you through the tough times. So thank you for your sentiments. Jim,
do you want to weigh in real quick?
Well, I'll just say that the lasting impression from the service was the eulogies offered by your two sons. Obviously, that's a tough assignment for any child, and they both performed with flying colors, which is not necessarily what you're looking for at a memorial service, but great tributes to Susan.
Well, they are her lasting living legacy, and she poured herself. She was the most devoted mother I've ever seen, and she helped those boys in all sorts of ways, and they'll hopefully live their lives in honor of her. And I was proud of the way they handled it. Frankly, they handled it better than me. So maybe there is hope for the future.
I remember meeting you a few times, and the last time I met you was in the mayor's office, and it was the only time that we had really had a chance to chat, and you were very kind. I was working for Greg Ballard at the time, and we talked for a couple of minutes about your family. And I remember telling you, and you kind of put your hand on the side of my arm and said thank you. But I remember telling you about my memory. I was young, maybe 11, of my mother crying when your mother died of cancer.
Yeah, we've had a history with cancer in our family. My mother got breast cancer. She was only 39, and then she went into remission after treatment, mastectomy and radiation and chemo and all that. Said the best 6 years of her life were after that because she didn't take her life for granted and really tried to embrace it more. And then it came back, and it took her when I was a freshman in first-year law student, which ironically, my son Bo was a first-year law student when brain cancer took his mom. But I think I really have no doubt that my wife and my mother are having a grand old time together. Because my wife my mother never met my wife, vice versa. But they had a lot in common. Both very outgoing, vivacious people, optimistic people, persons, and my sons, I had a pretty tall order in finding a woman who would live up to the standard my mother set, and my sons do as well. So I'm sure they'll work that out. But it's, thank you for mentioning my mom. She, as I said at the service, Robert, I started off by saying my father was my best man at our wedding. And as they played the bridal march, he leaned over to me and he said, congratulations, son, you're out marrying yourself. And he was absolutely right about that.
I don't know how the hell I ended up a Republican, because the only two people you couldn't badmouth in my house growing up were Birch Bayh and Andy Jacobs. And I was lucky enough to have had lunch and have a really good friendship with Andy Jacobs, who I just think the absolute world of. And I did a podcast on the memory of your father. I think I even maybe have sent that to you. And it's one of my favorites. Bob Blameyer and Nancy Pappas and Louis Mahern came on and really had a terrific discussion about his impact.
Well, I'm proud of my father and the impact he made on our state and country. He led a life worth living, which was devoted primarily to trying to help other people make the most of their lives. And so I hope you don't have to be in public office to do that. There are a lot of honorable ways to do that. Any number of education, healthcare, being in the media, trying to keep the citizens informed and knowledgeable about what's going on in the world. My son's done tours in the military. That's a good way to do it. So, and my father had the privilege of doing that for the people of our state for many, many years. And Andy was one of my favorites. Of course, he was a Marine in Korea and was at the Frozen Chosen, which was one of the Marine Corps' toughest times. And I think that always informed his politics, because anything you're going to encounter in politics, as they say, it ain't beanbag, but it ain't gonna be as tough as having a million Chinese swarming down on you trying to kill you. So when I first went to Andy and told him I was thinking about running for office, he said to me, as he had a great sense of humor. He said, I'll be for you or against you, whichever will help you the most. So I've always remembered that. I also remember he got some heated letter from a constituent who was really giving him hell about something or other. And Andy replied, he replied by saying, dear Mr. Jones, you should know that some nut has apparently gotten hold of your stationery and is sending out letters under your name. I thought you should know. I love that story, and I bet he probably did.
I have no doubt. And as someone whose son did 2 tours over in Afghanistan, thank you for your family's service, for your son's service to the United States.
That's kind of you to mention, since I was with Jim at my wife's memorial a week ago Saturday. My son, he's at the Pentagon today. He just went active duty 3 days ago. And so he's got an interesting project. It's all public knowledge. It's Project Maven. There's something reassuring when you're a parent, when your children get their top secret security clearances, because the FBI goes and talks to all your friends and roommates and stuff like that. So both boys have them. In this case, the Marine Corps boy, he finished his first year in law school, and he just always wanted to go active duty. So they reached out to him, and what this involves is we're trying to keep pace with the Chinese. We may be a little bit behind, but it involves the use of artificial intelligence to improve the timing and the accuracy of our drone surveillance platform. So he'll be based in the Pentagon, but going to the Middle East and the Far East. So he's going to be sort of the guy in between the technology guys and the commanders in the field who actually operate the system. So he'll be doing that for the next year, and then he'll go back and finish up his law studies. And he worked at Cummins in Indianapolis this last summer, and he's got a job offer from a law firm in India, Barnes and Thornburg, for next summer. And my other son, the Army boy, he's in his second year of business school, but he owes the Army another 5 months. They took so long. There was a big backlog, and they took so long to get his security clearance done that he couldn't. He's an intelligence officer. The Marine Corps boy is an infantry commander. The Army boy is an intelligence officer, and he owes the Army another 5 months at a place called Fort Cojuca out in the desert in Arizona, where they do the intel training. So he'll finish up business school early and then do his the training out for the Army. And then he spent this last summer. This kid could do anything. He's smart like his mom. And he was with the Colts this last summer, living with the team, taking the players around, helping with salary cap management and a little data analytics. But he's kind of hoping, again, he could do Wall Street, he could do Silicon Valley, he could do anything. But he's kind of hoping that he can get an entry-level job with the Colts and he said if he could just do anything with his life, he'd love to run an NFL franchise someday. So I guess if you're young, why not pursue your dream?
Well, I'd love to relate to, since I was in the Army from 87 to 90, relate that the one son's doing Army intelligence and can't wait to tell Greg Ballard that the other one's just a Marine. He'll Ballard will love that.
I served on the intelligence. The Marine Corps boy is now a second lieutenant. The Army boy is still a first lieutenant. But I served on the Senate Intelligence Committee for 10 years, and I always hoped that was not an oxymoron. So I'll let you and the former mayor argue about Army intelligence.
Governor Bayh was born in December 1955. He's a fellow Capricorn, just like the host of the Leaders and Legends podcast. My birthday is December 22nd. Graduated with honors business economics from Indiana University in 1978. Received his law degree from the University of Virginia in 1981. You graduated from, I didn't know this until I was doing my research. You graduated from Indiana University at the same time, the same year as Mayor Greg Ballard, who has his degree in economics. Did you two happen to visit the same keg or know each other at all?
I didn't meet that mayor, but I did at least casually get to know the current mayor, Joe Hogsett, when we were down at IU together. But I did not know Greg. So as you mentioned, my degree was based in the business school. So you took the core business curriculum, which I have always thought stood me in good stead. But then with a heavy overlay of economics. And it was actually my degree was in business economics and public policy, which, given where my life ended up leading me, was pretty good grounding to have. So I did not have the pleasure of knowing Greg, but I did meet Joe Hogsett briefly.
Evan Bayh is one of only, this is for you, Jim Shella. Evan Bayh is one of only a few Hoosiers to have won, at the top of the ticket, at least 4 statewide elections. Who are the others?
Oh, my goodness. 4 statewide elections.
Lugar, obviously.
Golly, I didn't know I had to have my history hat on here.
Governor, I thought you'd like this gotcha question I'm getting ready to ask Shella. I'm stumping him here. If I only had a TV camera in front of him.
Yeah.
So was Bob Orr, Otis Bowen's lieutenant governor twice?
Yes.
He was, but that's not the top of the ticket. So you have
the top of the ticket. Okay,
yeah, so Frank O'Bannon doesn't count either. You've got Evan Bayh, twice as governor, twice as senator. Lugar, I think, didn't he win 6 Senate terms? He was going for his 7th, right? When he lost in that ridiculous primary.
Don't forget my Secretary of State's race. That happened to be that wasn't the top of the ticket though that year. There was a senator. Dan Quayle got reelected that year.
No, but that's still that you've won 5. Lugar's won 6, and the other 2 that I know off the top of my head who've won 4 are Tim Berry and Marge O'Laughlin. I think.
Oh, sure, cool. Marge O'Laughlin. Right? Was that treasurer and auditor?
I think that. I think she did treasurer and something else, but to win at least 4 statewide elections in Indiana, especially we should say as a Democrat, is a significant achievement and one of Governor Bayh's certainly shining points on his political resume. I wanted to ask you, while we're talking about politics for a second, what was your first political memory?
Well, my first political memory would have taken me all the way back to when I was 7 years old. Actually, I was 6. Turns out a little bit later in my father's first election, 1962. So election night, went really late. He ended up winning by like 0.1%. I think like 10,000 votes statewide. And so they went ahead and put me to bed. My grandfather slept lying on the floor, tried to sleep lying on the floor outside my room so nobody would come in and bother me. But I remember them, I remember sitting there while they were watching the TV, the black and white screen back in those days, and taking phone calls from people around the state trying to figure out what was going on. And then next morning I woke up and asked how it turned out, and they said he'd won very narrowly. So that's really my first political memory.
Who did he beat? Did he beat Jenner or Capehart? Who did he beat?
No, it was Homer Capehart.
Homer Capehart.
Yeah.
What was it like to be in Bloomington for the undefeated 1976 32-0 basketball national championship?
Well, actually, the team the year before was a little better, which lost one game because we had Scotty May, who was probably our best scorer, and we'd beaten Kentucky by, I want to say 20-something during the regular season. And then he broke his arm and tried to play, but wasn't really very effective. I think he ended up getting like 3 or 4 points, and we lost to that same Kentucky team by, I want to say 4 in the Mideast Regional. But that team was a machine. Steve Green was starting at 1-4. We had John Laskowski as sort of the sixth man. And then, they were beating people by an average of 18, 20 points, something like that. And then, so my first 2 years at IU, we lost a total of 1 game, which was probably about the same number of football games we won. So it was great. We went to all the games, even when we were up in the nosebleed section, and they had a lottery for the tickets. So for a few of them, we get down there in the main level, and it was great. One of my favorite memories was, I think it may have been 74-75 team. We were beating the Illinois team by like 30-something points, and with a minute and a half left, the crowd was on its feet, particularly the student section, just chanting defense, defense. So after the game, the Daily Student and the Herald Tribune down there went to interview the Illinois coach, and he said, "These are the most bloodthirsty fans I've ever seen. They were showing no mercy, no pity, no nothing. This is just a snake pit, here." And then someone informed them that the local McDonald's had a promotion that if IU held their opponent to under 69 points, we got a free small Coke, under 59 points, a free small fry, and under 49 points, a free burger. And the Illini were stuck at 46 points. And so we were all looking forward to that free burger and just calling on the Hoosiers to keep their foot on the pedal. And so I think they had to keep the local McDonald's open till like 3 a.m. You had to go with your ticket stub to get your burger. And so McDonald's made good on their pledge, but they had to stay open late. And so when they explained that to the Illinois coach, he then realized maybe we weren't quite as bloodthirsty as he thought. We were hungry, but not quite as bloodthirsty.
Now you become governor, and Jim Shella is going to talk to you all about that stuff, your Secretary of State run, and take you through that. But did you get to? Can I
say one other thing? So
yes, sir.
One of the kind of most memorable things I did when I was governor was Coach Knight knew I'd been a student down there during that time, and he was friendly with my father, and so he invited me. He said, "Pick an away game. Come with the team. We'll have you on the team plane. You stay with the team." And so I picked the Ohio State game. So I went down to Bloomington. I got on the team plane. We flew into Columbus. I was at the team dinner the night before when they're going through their strategy stuff. He had me sitting on the end of the bench during the game. And I'd kind of go up and listen to them when they had timeout huddles and stuff like that. I think I went over, did a little color commentary, went into the locker room at halftime and realized the coach was somewhat displeased with their performance during the first half. So I wandered over into the training area to see Damon Bailey get his ankle retaped, and that was quite an experience. And flew back to Bloomington on the. We were up by 18, blew the entire lead, and ended up losing the game. So the players were wondering when I first got on the plane in Bloomington to go. They go, "Who's this guy? What's he doing here?" And 3 or 4 of them, when we got off the plane back in Bloomington, came up and thanked me for being there. It occurred to me the coach was reading his book on fly fishing. And just saying nothing. I wasn't going to bother him after a loss. So I was just sitting across from him, reading whatever I had. So a very quiet flight back. I think the players realized if the governor hadn't been sitting there, the flight home might have been a little more pointed.
Well, that's actually, you led me exactly where I was going to ask you is, you become governor, you're an IU grad, you were there for the 76 undefeated season. And, did you get to know that a lot of these players, whether it was Quinn Buckner or who I know is very active in the Indianapolis community, and some of the others were like, "I remember when I used to see you on the quad," or something like that? I mean, did you reestablish some of those connections when you became the governor of our state?
Well, the athletes, of course, that was a big time commitment and all that. And I didn't really get to know, Quinn or Kent. I met Kent Benson, years later. He was involved with the Association of Christian Athletes and that kind of thing. So Yeah, I got to know a few of them, but I did not know them when I was an undergraduate. Personally, I just didn't travel in those circles. But I'm a big IU fan. By the way, one of the things I learned from Richard Lugar. So I'm elected governor in November of '88. So I become, take office in January. And believe it or not, the Hoosiers had won the Peach Bowl that previous fall. So there was a home game down in Bloomington, basketball game, and they were going to present the trophy, and the coach and the athletic director were going to accept the trophy and all that. And I hadn't been in office long enough to make anybody mad or to really make any serious mistakes, but they went ahead and introduced me to the crowd. And I'll just say the reception was somewhat mixed, although I was happier to know I got the students were a little more favorable than some of the wealthier alums who I suspect will probably had their sentiments on the other side of the aisle. But yeah, Dick told me, he said, I would just have a standing rule. I never let him mention my name at any athletic event. So I kind of adopted his approach going forward.
The last question I want to kind of ask you about your pre-electoral career is about the two things. One, the relationship between Senator Lugar and your father. Birch Bayh famously defeated Richard Lugar in 1974. In that Titanic clash and the Watergate year. It was a very close race. But Senator Bayh prevailed. But they appeared to have a strong working relationship that began 2 years later in 1976 when Richard Lugar was elected to the United States Senate. That's A. And B, what is probably the greatest statewide political upset in Indiana history was when Dan Quayle defeated your father in 1980, when I think Birch Bayh was one of 11 Democratic senators who lost that year. First, talk about their relationship very quickly, and then your thoughts on 1980.
Well, first of all, they had a very good relationship, and Dick Lugar is he was a statesman, and I think it's because both of them were in public life and politics for the right reasons, and that was trying to help people out, and they weren't strident partisans, and they weren't ideologues, and I think they were from sort of the old school where, people didn't take their politics quite so personally as people are today. I mean, you had differences of opinion, you could debate issues and stuff like that, but that didn't mean you ended up hating the other person and that sort of thing. So it's just a different time, and they were different people. I wish we could have more of their approach in politics today. I've got a lot of Republican friends, and I tried to, carry my father's approach to that over, both as governor and then when I was privileged to follow him in the Senate. 1980, well, the first thing in terms of, you're going to ask me any questions, you or Jim, about my political acumen, I should probably, in the interest of full disclosure, I was the chairman of his losing senatorial campaign. So what do I know? But it's, and I ended up, you mentioned that it's difficult, which I think is a fair assessment, all else being equal, for a Democrat to win statewide in Indiana. And that year, Jimmy Carter was getting shellacked by Ronald Reagan. I can't remember what the margin was in our state, but it was, huge. And so that's just a lot to go up against. And then when I came out of retirement, against my wife's better judgment, and tried to run for the Senate again for all the right reasons, it turned out to be a political miscalculation. But Donald Trump was carrying our state by 20 points that year. So I think the same thing happened to my father. It was sort of an anti-incumbent thing. Even though I wasn't an incumbent, I was kind of viewed that way. And when people used to split their tickets a little bit more. Today, particularly for federal offices, it's just become very tribal, and it's really not personal. People just vote for the party that they adhere to, and that's kind of that. It's harder to break through. It might be a little bit easier if you're running for governor, but for a federal office like Senate, it's just really hard to overcome the underlying predisposition of a state like ours. So that happened to my father in 1980, and then it ended up happening to me 30 years later, and that's Robert, what they would call an occupational hazard of being a Democrat in a conservative state like ours.
Well, I'm going to turn it over to Jim, and he's going to start with your 86 race for Secretary of State against Rob Bowen. But there are a handful of political accomplishments that I believe stand out. Greg Ballard's reelection in 2011 in Marion County, I think Mitch Daniels carrying Marion County in 2008 when Barack Obama carried it by 140,000 votes. And the other one I would say right off the top of my head is you winning governor in 1988 when Bush and Lugar are both on the ticket in what was a great Republican year. Jim.
Michael Dukakis lost that year by our state by 20%, and I ended up winning by 6, which I don't think you could do that today. Back then people voted more for the individual. They would be willing to split their tickets a lot more than today, I think. And people were, today people kind of claim they're independent. Some do. But back then they were actually independent, and they'd kind of pick and choose. So, that was kind of a heavy lift, but people were willing to give me a chance.
Tremendous political accomplishment for sure. In 1986, our guest, Evan Bayh, decided to run for Secretary of State. And not only did he run, but he won, and he's probably single-handedly responsible for elevating that office to certainly the primacies for which it is viewed today. Mr. Jim Shella, your turn.
Well, Senator, you ran against Rob Bowen in that race, who was the son of Otis Bowen, who was a very popular Indiana governor. And as I recall, the Republican establishment went to great effort to encourage Rob Bowen to enter that race because they thought the only way to take on a legacy was to find a legacy of their own. I can tell you, I went to Bremen, Indiana, where Rob lived, in an older home on Main Street, to do a profile on him. And after we turned the camera off, he explained to me how he and his wife had remodeled half of that home, and they were planning the next year to remodel the other half. And I looked at him and I said, "Aren't you planning to live in Indianapolis?" And it was clear that I caught him off guard. Clearly his heart and soul was not in that race, I don't believe. But at the same time, you didn't take it for granted, did you?
That race? Heck no. Jim, you've described the situation pretty correctly. The polling all showed that, I was doing very well, and then they convinced Rob to get in it. And so his father, Otis Bowen, was 8% more popular than my father, Birch Bayh. And so Rob was ahead of me by 8 points. I think in our polling with like 2 weeks to go, he was still up 8 points. And so, heck no, I think our chances of winning that election were probably 1 in 3, something like that. So, no, I didn't take that for granted.
And as I recall, a big factor in that race was radio commercials that aired over the last weekend, correct?
Well, it was TV for the last 3 weeks and then radio as well. So we saved our money for the end because we knew that the other side would have a lot more money. And so we came out, with very high levels of advertising in a fairly short period of time. And as you recall, I think Rob is a good guy, and he really is a good guy. But I think he was pretty happy being a judge up there and living his life up there. And then they convinced him to get in this race. And as you recall, they had to put him on the Republican State Central Committee payroll, which there's nothing illegal about that, nothing unethical. But as you recall, the Republican Party led by Governor Orr had, our listeners may not remember this, they may not even think it's true, but it is. Whenever you would buy a vanity license plate in the state, part of that fee you would pay would go to the political party of the governor. And they were in the process of phasing that out, but hadn't phased it out yet. And so that ended up becoming an issue, which then kind of turned an 8-point deficit into what ended up being an 8-point lead. But it had to happen in a fairly short period of time. But we had very high levels of advertising, and the Republican State Party they never responded. And I think that's because they thought we were going to run out of money, but we didn't.
And you talked about meeting Joe Hogsett at Indiana University. He was your campaign manager in that race, correct?
That's correct. And I think he agreed to work for the princely annual sum of like $16,000. So when Joe says that he's frugal, he's been frugal for a long time. It's true.
So you turn around and decide to run for governor in 1988. And again, the Republicans decided that they didn't want to take you head on. They pursued a residency case. They tried to make the case that you had violated the residency requirement to run for governor in Indiana, which is 5 years. And there was a trial. Did you ever worry that residency case would be successful?
I did a couple of times. So first, they were because, again, John Mutz is a fine person. But in the polling, I was running ahead of John by like 8 to 10 points. And so obviously they were concerned about that. And so they were first hoping to take me off have me taken off the ballot. Well, I'd had a very bright individual named David Hamilton, who's now a Seventh Circuit U.S. Court of Appeals judge, Yale Law School grad, one of the smartest people I know. He was at Barnes and Thornburg in those days, and he had researched all this. So I was fairly confident that on the merits, I would win because I had never given up I don't want to get too legalistic here, but it all turns on the question of where your permanent home is. You're allowed to leave Indiana for some interim period as long as you intend to come home, and it's kind of your permanent home, which in my case, it always had been. Which, by the way, Jim, one of the key pieces of evidence at the trial was, even while I was out of the state for about a year and a half, I maintained a daily subscription to the Indianapolis Star. So who does that if you don't intend to come home? So in any event, they were hoping to win, and the makeup of the Supreme Court was 4 Republican appointees and 1 Democrat, and the Democrat recused himself. So I went home and told my wife, I said, sweetheart, it's all over. I think this is probably just not going to go our way here. But you can read about all this. Joe Hogsett wrote a thesis on it, actually. And about a 200-page thing getting all the ins and outs of this. And I think originally the justices were going to be split 2-2, but that they ended up ruling 4-0. That I was not an illegal alien, that I had been, always had been born in Union Hospital in Terre Haute, Indiana, and always, had intended to remain a Hoosier. So there was all that. But, when the Democrat recused himself, I did think that who knew how it was going to work. But there was another reason, Jim, which you can appreciate for them doing this. In the process of the litigation, they were able to engage in discovery, which was, a political opponent's dream. So they were able to get copies of every check I had written for years, copies of my credit card statements for years, copies of my phone records for years. I mean, everything. They were able to do a complete, X-ray of my life. I remember sitting on so I had to take the stand under oath and be, cross-examined by their attorney. And I remember him looking at me saying, we've got a check here showing that you purchased a couch in Washington, D.C. Doesn't that show that you had intended to remain there? And I looked and I said, no, sir, that shows that I didn't intend to sit on the floor. So in any event, they were able to just go do a deep dive, everything about me in every which way. And so I think they were greatly disappointed that they didn't find anything, but they didn't know that before they began the exercise. So they did it for that reason too.
Governor, before Joe Hogsett became mayor, he sent me a copy of his thesis, the one you just described. Have you read it?
Uh-huh. I have. It's been long enough ago. I can't tell you it's on the top of my mind, but I did look through it.
One last question, and I'll let Jim continue. Do you get the sense that the Republicans were just scared of you, of what Evan Bayh candidacy could mean for that race, and what an Evan Bayh governorship could mean politically for the next 10, 20 years?
Well, I'll let you make that assessment, Robert. But I will say, I think that the then leadership of the Republican Party, not Governor or John Mutz, but the other political types, I think they'd been in office for so long, 20 years, they just kind of thought it was their birthright. And they just thought that, no one should challenge them, and that they thought that this was a potential challenge. And they were willing to go to great lengths to try and see that the status quo prevailed, and they continued to kind of control everything. So did that make them frightened? I don't know. But I guess looking at their actions, you might conclude that. So by the way, there's another thing in Joe's thesis there, which I recall, and Jim, you'll appreciate this. So
Yeah.
The then leader of the chairman of the Republican Party. So I announced as Secretary of State, all the statewide officials, this may still be the case, got a free car. And so, to use to drive around the state. So I announced I wasn't going to take the free car. I was just going to use my own car. And the then Republican Party chairman issued a press release claiming that I had committed a felony because I was attempting to bribe the voters. And so my response to that was, these guys have been in power so long, they actually think it's a crime to save the taxpayers' money. In any event, kind of interesting times.
Do believe
and
that
they had been in power a long time, and I think Mitch Daniels said, when he was running, every so often, 16 years, 20 years, the garden needs a little weeding, right? And so, anytime one group controls everything for that long, they tend to get a little complacent and maybe not quite as careful with the taxpayers' money, and maybe not working quite as hard on behalf of the public. And competition is a healthy thing all the way around.
Yeah, for the record, you're referring to GOP Chairman Gordon Darnell at the time. One of the keys to you defeating John Mutz in 1988 was the fact that you were able to unify the Democratic Party. Frank O'Bannon started out as the candidate for governor in that race, and the two of you joined together with O'Bannon as your running mate. What did it take to convince him to take the number 2 spot?
Well, the most important thing about all that is the character of Frank O'Bannon. I mean, he was older than me. He'd served in the state Senate as a Democratic leader for a long time. And by all rights, he would have thought, hey, this younger individual should be my running mate, not the other way around. And so it really was an act of statesmanship on Frank's part to agree to run as my lieutenant governor. And as you recall, Jim, getting back to a previous question here, Frank actually kept his name on the ballot, which I agreed with, in case the Supreme Court took me off, right? So that he would be there and would be the gubernatorial nominee in case I was ruled to be invalid. But if my residency was upheld, which it was, then we would run as a team and he would serve as lieutenant governor. But the main thing is that just shows a kind of human being that everybody who knows Frank O'Bannon knew him to be, which was, modest, not egotistical, interested in, doing the right thing, the greater good, not just all about, him and his own ambitions or that sort of thing. So what did it take to convince Frank? We had a couple of conversations where we just kind of talked about the political realities of the situation. And it was, more likely than not that if we had a primary, I would prevail. But that the consequence of that would be to create ill will and spend resources and things that would just make it harder to win in the fall. And so Frank was willing to kind of step back and say, okay, what really matters here is not so much who's at the top of the ticket, but that we together prevail in the fall. And that really is what led him to making his decision. And it was just an act of real character and statesmanship on his part, putting the greater good ahead of his own personal ambition.
The biggest issue in the fall race was your criticism of the deal to bring Subaru Isuzu to West Lafayette. Any regrets about how that issue was handled at this point in your life?
Not really, Jim. I think it was mischaracterized. As you'll recall, I'll explain myself here. As you'll recall, I think Tennessee had gotten a Nissan plant, and I want to say Illinois had gotten a Mitsubishi plant, and maybe Kentucky had gotten a Toyota plant. Other states were bidding for these. And I think that the governor and lieutenant governor just decided, particularly the lieutenant governor, that they needed one of these for what they believe were the merits of the case. But then also politically that we hadn't, been outcompeted by neighboring states, and this was going to be a feather in their cap. So when you look at the amount of state incentives per job created, they were just way off the charts in comparison to other states. And I think that was proven and validated. Why? To get back to the underlying premise of your question, when Toyota decided to locate that big facility down in Southwest Indiana, the amount of incentives that we offered them was substantially less per job. So I know some people characterized that or thought it was anti-Japanese. It wasn't. I was willing to give incentives to a Japanese company to locate another automobile plant in our state. But I thought it ought to be a good deal for the taxpayers, and we were able to, get a much better deal. So to the extent anyone misconstrued that as any way derogatory to people of Japanese descent, well, I would regret that. But that was not the intention or the underlying reason for the criticism. It was just that they way overpaid. And I would have leveled the same criticism if it had been a Swedish company or an English company or a German company.
So you went on to serve 2 terms as governor. And for me, looking back, the biggest change that resulted during that time was the advent of legalized gambling. Would you take any issue with that?
Well, as you recall, there were 2 phases to all that. The state constitution had to be amended, and it was the same year I was elected governor. It had to pass, twice? Is that the mechanism? So in any event, the voters had authorized the creation of a lottery. And so I didn't have any problem with the lottery because we were actually having millions of dollars flow out of Hoosiers were playing the lottery. They were just playing the Illinois lottery or the other states' lottery. So better to keep those dollars at home. So I didn't have a problem with all that, and readily supported that. Then the riverboat gaming thing came along, and as you recall, that got embedded in. I was sort of agnostic about that. I didn't, I was not a proponent. It was nothing I was in favor of, but I wasn't out there crusading against it either. But as you recall, that thing got stuck into a budget that was just way out of whack. And I think the Republican leaders in the state legislature were trying to saddle me with a tax increase by having a budget that was just spending way more than we thought was going to be coming in. And one of the ways they got the Democrats to support the damn thing was by putting that riverboat legislation in there. So I ended up vetoing it. So that the riverboat legislation ended up being passed over my veto. But I vetoed it largely because of, almost solely because of what I felt was just an fiscally irresponsible budget. Not so much the riverboat part of it, which they had used that as a mechanism to appeal to certain Democrats to support what was otherwise just not a sound budget.
What do you think was your biggest accomplishment as governor?
Well, you've covered me long enough to know that I am genuinely fiscally more moderate to conservative. That's not just a political slogan. So I think the fact that we were able to navigate 8 years, never had a tax increase, and left the state with what at that time was the largest budget surplus in state history was a good thing. We'd also been able to cut the auto license tax in very substantially. Many of our listeners here today may not appreciate, but it used to be the tax when you got a license plate for your car was very, very high, much higher than it is today. So we were able to cut that. So I think the whole fiscal management of the state through good times and bad, really, and sending a message to the business community around the country that if you come and invest in Indiana, if you put capital into Indiana and try and grow a business, hire people, that regardless of whether Democrats or Republicans are in charge, the fiscal situation in the state is going to be responsible and solid. And so I think that was a good accomplishment. We were able to raise K through 12 funding every year, even in the tough 90-91 period. It wasn't a lot, but we were able to do it during those 2 years as well. And so I'm proud of that. I think we made some significant strides in the environmental arena in terms of water quality standards. And those license plates you see around the state for the Hoosier Environmental Trust, that we started that with Bart Peterson's able leadership while I was governor. And then I think probably the thing that's closest to my heart is the 21st Century Scholars Program, which enables families of more modest means for their children to go to college and to get a college degree without taking on the enormous amounts of debt that too many of our young people have to do today. And so I am never happier than when someone will come up and introduce themselves to me and tell me they're a 21st century scholar and what a difference that's made to their lives, because there are maybe more than 100,000 of them now out there. And that's my favorite thing. Governor Pence was kind enough to name it for me. Everybody loves you when you're gone.
Well, yeah, I have a self-serving question here. During your time as governor, I did a weekly interview with you. We would have a little visit every Friday, and we would package up an interview that aired on the Sunday evening news. And I took a lot of criticism from Republicans for creating that platform. And I had a favorite answer for them. They would accuse me of asking you softball questions, and I would say to them, "Get your own governor. We'll treat him the same way."
Well, touche. Besides, if I was half as bad as they were claiming, they should have wanted me to be out there on TV so people could see.
And Jim, I'm sure McDaniel and Rex Early loved that answer.
Well,
go ahead, Jim.
Well, when Mike Pence became governor, he came up to me one day and said, "I want to do that interview you did with Evan Bayh." So,
Well, I was sorry to see that Rex was ill. I've been exchanging texts with his son Pat, and Rex and I obviously there's no fiercer Republican than Rex Early, but he and I actually became friendly because my first political incarnation, as Robert pointed out, was as Secretary of State, and we had the closest congressional race in the country. It was by 46 votes on election night up there in the district that centered around South Bend and Elkhart. And so after a while, Rex and I would just start driving up there and back together. So we'd spend 3.5 hours in the car each way. You know, I didn't know how to swear until I spent that amount of time with Rex in the car. In any event, yeah, I was the chairman of the Recount Commission. So that all came down. Judge Hamilton, now Judge Hamilton, it all came down to one precinct, Bago 76, I want to say, in Elkhart. And in any event, it was a big Republican precinct. So if that precinct got thrown out, it was going to elect the Democrat. And if that precinct got counted, it was going to elect the Republican. Well, the ballots hadn't been stored quite correctly. There had been a lock not placed on there was no evidence of fraud, no evidence of tampering, no evidence that there was anything wrong, but all the appropriate procedures had not been followed to the letter. And so the good Judge Hamilton voted. He said there are technical violations here. The ballots should be thrown out. And Rex Early, of course, voted to count the ballots. I'd run on a platform of trying to, if you could determine the voter's intent, even if there was some kind of imperfection, in the absence of evidence of fraud or wrongdoing, if you knew what the voter wanted to do, you should count their vote. So I cast a tie-breaking vote in favor of counting the ballots, which I thought was the right thing to do, and essentially seating the Republican. And so whatever else Rex knew about me, he knew that I was honest. And I gather that was not always common in his experience in politics. So in any event, he and I always had a very good relationship, and I'm just sorry that he's ill.
So you after I wanted to say at the very end, I guess, of your service as governor, you started to play more of a role in national politics, and I have to believe that one of the highlights of your career was delivering the keynote address at the 1996 Democratic Convention.
That was one of the lowlights.
Well, it didn't work out the way it was planned. I know that. Being chosen for that, it had to be a highlight. The way it played out, as I recall, Hillary Clinton stayed on stage a little too long, and you ended up going on after prime time, correct? It was quite.
Yeah. What happened there was, she ran over, and George Stephanopoulos kind of set that whole thing up. But she ran over. So at the end of her speech, the lights in the house went up, and everybody thought the thing was over. And they started streaming toward the exit. So I'm sitting there looking at a stadium full of people, all of whom have decided the night's over, and they're leaving. I mean, all of them leaving. And so I just had to kind of soldier on and speak to essentially a room that was rapidly emptying out. And it was just, that was a tough assignment. So when it was all over, I went backstage, and the main media guy said, "That was a disaster." And he said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Didn't you see what was going on out there?" He said, "No. I was looking at the TV screen. All I care about is what people see at home. And it looked great on TV." And I said, "No kidding." And he said, and what else?" He said, nobody cares about a political convention. Nobody was going to tune in to watch that. But your ratings were a lot higher because all over the East Coast, people tuned in because they thought they were going to get the local weather at 11:20, not some political convention. And there you were. So in any event, that was a really hard assignment. I kind of, if you'll forgive me using a technical term, got a little screwed there. But it ended up having the silver lining that it looked okay on TV, and I actually had a larger television audience. I should do an oral history. I should do an oral history someday because there are just all these great stories that whenever I lose my mental capacity, if it's not already gone, will go with me.
Well, since Hogsett wrote your thesis or wrote a thesis, you can, if you want to choose me for the oral history, that, nice little bipartisan. I voted for you twice. I think I voted for you in 92 because that was, I just couldn't be turned on to vote.
Is this a public confession, Robert?
Well, I confessed it on Indiana Week in Review one time. Shella dimed me out because he knew. And then I voted for you in 98 and 2004 because, part of it because of my mother's loyalty to the Bayh family. I mean, her thoughts and her opinion of your dad and your mom were just so incredibly high. And my mother was in the Marine Corps and she was fiercely loyal. And, even there's a lot of Republicans. I mean, let's be honest here. If a huge percentage of Republicans didn't think that you, A, would be a good governor, or B, weren't already a good governor, then, the results in those two elections would have been somewhat different. But to be able to win.
Doubt. People were willing to look beyond the party labels and look at the individual human beings, in this case, me, and render a verdict on me rather than just the party to which I happen to belong. And besides, Robert, I've got just a lot of Republican friends, and as you point out, a lot of Republicans voted for me. And I used to say to people, my Republican friends, I used to say, you got to vote for at least one Democrat to prove you're open-minded. So it may as well be me.
I voted for you, and then I always voted for Andy Jacobs because of just the man he was. Such a terrific Hoosier. When you look at what Mitch Daniels was able to accomplish, and particularly his 2008 reelect, did it seem familiar to you? In other words, okay, it's a Republican state, but Daniels' margin in 2008 clearly was representative of a higher level of popularity. When I was working for Greg Ballard and was basically his, principal speechwriter and PR person or whatever, I would tell him, every time you speak, you need to picture the house in Indianapolis that has an Obama sign and a Daniels sign, because they just want results and honesty and high character. And so when you see what Daniels was able to accomplish in his landslide, you say, look, see, a bunch of my fellow Democrats crossed over and voted for him, just like a bunch of Daniels' fellow Republicans crossed over and voted for me.
Well, Mitch obviously is a very intelligent person. He's doing a great job at my father's alma mater up there in West Lafayette, and he and I have a good personal relationship. Sherry was kind enough to come to my wife's memorial service. Mitch would have come. He called me. He said it was his homecoming, so he obviously had to be at Purdue. So I think that's just proof that, look, for an election in Indiana, if it's about the party label or the prevailing perception about the underlying ideology of the two parties, it's just that kind of perception, the Republicans will win every time. The challenge for a Democrat is to make it about the individual candidates and their beliefs and ideas and the merits of those beliefs and ideas, not the stereotypes of the two parties. So, but Mitch is, the fact that he could win overwhelmingly at a time when President Obama was doing well, that shows that he obviously had a lot to offer, that Hoosiers, he being Mitch Daniels, had a lot to offer that Hoosiers embraced.
Jim, do you want to take the governor through his two Senate runs real quick?
Well, yeah, I think at the pace we're going, we're not gonna get through them in great detail. But Senator, you took 2 years off after leaving the governor's office to be in the private sector, and then ran for the U.S. Senate and won 2 terms. And you told me at one point that you enjoyed being governor much more than you did being senator, because it's much better to be an executive who's making decisions than to be in a legislative body. Did I get that right?
You did get that right, Jim. Look, being governor or senator, they're both a tremendous honor. But they're just so different. If you're an executive, you're making decisions. I mean, it's a much harder job. It's a 24/7 job. I mean, things happen in the middle of the night. Things happen on holidays, Sundays. I mean, you're just always on the clock. But you're also making things happen. And I just find that that's what motivates me to be in public life, is to try and make good things happen that will enable people to make the most of their own lives. And I think you just do that more as an executive, whether it's mayor, governor, president, than you do in a legislative body. And you combine that with so in the Senate, if you're intellectually curious, it's a great place. I mean, you have national issues, global issues. I was dealing with national security issues on the Armed Services Committee and the Intelligence Committee, which post 9/11 took on a whole new level of importance. And we dealt with the financial crisis, which we came very, very close to having a second Great Depression, the first impeachment of a president since 1868. I mentioned the terrorist attack and the financial panic. So there was a lot going on. But months go by and you don't do anything. And then it just also gets back to just my underlying temperament and character, which I think is I'm a pragmatist. I've got my principles and that sort of thing, but I like to make progress. And if I can't get everything I want, well, then I'm willing to try and get as much done as I can. Washington has just become so partisan, and people care more about, politics than they do about really making progress for the people they were sent there to serve. And it's become very ideological. You get these folks who are just, and they're on both sides, all or nothing. Well, if you take an all or nothing approach, most of the time, nothing is what you're going to get. And so I'm just not wired that way. Feel like we ought to try and get as much done as we can. And that's just not Congress right now. So that's why I ended up retiring after 2 years in the Senate. Plus, Susan convinced me that there was nothing dishonorable about paying for our son's college. So there was that too. But it's just, Congress has said since my father's time. And even when I began, it's just, it's just not the way it was. It used to be we were all hopefully good individuals who were sent to a place. We happened to belong to different political parties, but being an American was more important than being a Republican or a Democrat or a liberal or a conservative. And there just aren't many people who are willing to look at it that way these days. And I think that's wrong. I think it's harmful to the country, but it seems to be the place that we're at right now.
At one point, you took a look at running for president. You started to put together a campaign. It didn't go very far. Describe that experience.
Well, I forgot to take my medicine there for a brief period of time. And once I got back on the meds and was thinking more clearly, I figured out that, I'm joking, of course, that wasn't the right thing to do. Well, it goes back to my experience as governor. And you care about the country. You care about doing everything you can to, help as many people as you can. I'd been successful in a very red state, and the Republicans had controlled the White House for a while, so thought that maybe my approach might have some appeal to the places that we needed to do to be successful. But then what happened was the Democratic Party did very well in the midterm elections. And so rather than figuring out like they did with Bill Clinton, look, we need a moderate to win, the prevailing view became, well, we can really still be really liberal and still win. And, clearly that wasn't going to be me. So I didn't want to run for president. There are some people who do. It's just kind of on their bucket list, and they're not going to go to their graves happy unless they've run for president, no matter how improbable success might be. I'm not one of those people. If there was a realistic chance of being successful and actually being in a position to help the country and help our people, well, then I would sacrifice everything and go for it. But if it was just about my ego, well, I didn't need to do it for that reason. And so basically, Jim, I concluded that in that prevailing political environment, if the Democrats hadn't done as well as they did in the midterm elections because the American public was kind of unhappy about the state of affairs in Iraq under then President Bush, I probably would have run. and I think I would have had a decent chance. But because of the results of the midterm and the effect that had upon the prevailing view of primary voters in the National Democratic Party, I thought it was not winnable.
Daniel Patrick Moynihan once said that every member of the U.S. Senate hears "Hail to the Chief" wafting from under the bed when he wakes in the morning. You're saying that's not the case with you?
Well, most of them probably hear it when they go to sleep at night, too. But no, it was not. It's more of a practical thing. Look, running for president is a major undertaking, and it puts an incredible strain on your family if you've got young children like we did. It's not something to be undertaken lightly, and I think should only be undertaken if you feel like you've got a realistic chance of being successful, because after all, it's not just about running and winning an office. It's about having a chance to serve and to do good things for the public. So, no, in my case, it wasn't. I ended up not going forward, and I've never second guessed that decision for a moment, and will go to my grave without something like that bothering me.
And yet you agreed to be considered to be Barack Obama's running mate. There are conflicting reports about whether you were in the top two or not. Was it your belief that you came in second in that contest?
It is, and I have that on pretty good authority. And obviously, then Senator Biden was picked, and he was a great vice president. He's serving as president now, so he's done great, and I'm happy for him. But I've also been led to believe that the deciding factor in the decision was that if I had been picked, I would have been replaced in the Senate by a Republican. And when Joe was picked, the Democratic governor of Delaware replaced him with a Democrat. And Harry Reid, who was the leader of the Senate Democrats, was just lobbying then Senator candidate Obama very hard, saying, I need every vote I can get. Don't pick Evan Bayh. And I think it was kind of a coin flip. Well, I know it was in it's been in a book by his campaign manager. There was a kind of a coin flip, and so in that situation, I think it was the difference in the Senate seat that made the final decision. How
disappointing was that?
It was not disappointing. It would have been great. I would have embraced it, and if that had happened, might have really opened up an avenue to running for president someday. Mm-hmm. And so it would have been a wonderful opportunity to serve, to make a difference, and might have changed my life politically, even beyond that, as has proven to be the case for now President Biden. But I'm not someone to regret things or that sort of thing. It's you got to be a big boy about these things, and he made a good pick. So happened it wasn't me, and that's just how life works. I guess another way to look at it, Jim, if you come down and it's between you and one other person to be the vice presidential candidate, you must have done some right with your life, right? So I'll tell you one other story. So they did just an exhaustive background check on me, all my tax records, medical records, social media, everything conceivable. They talked to your wife, they talked to your children, they talked to your parents, your friends. I mean, it was everything. This was a full colonoscopy, every which way. So I go out to meet him. They fly me in secret out. He was campaigning in St. Louis. So they fly me out there, and I go up the back service elevator, and I'm waiting for him in his hotel room when he comes in from campaigning. And he likes sports. The ESPN's on the TV, and we had some cheeseburgers. And then we talked for like 3.5 hours, and we got along great. But he's got this big stack, like 3 or 4 foot high stack of papers there. He says, this is all the background information on you, and I've gone through it all, and, there's nothing in there that bothers me. But if there's anything about you that my team didn't find, you need to let me know, because it's going to come out. And he said, they're even talking to people I was in first grade with. So, is there anything you think I ought to know? And I said, well, yeah, there's a couple things I think I should tell you. And I did. And he looked at me and he said, that's it? And I said, well, yeah, that's it. And then he said to me, well, you haven't led much of a life, have you? I've always enjoyed that.
Let me ask just a few more questions, and then we'll get to the final 5 questions to be respectful of Governor Evan Bayh's time, our guest on the Leaders and Legends podcast. I tried to look this up and I couldn't find it, a video clip per se, but it's traditional when you're elected to the United States Senate to have the senior senator stand behind you when you're being sworn in. Did you have Senator Richard Lugar stand behind you, and was your father involved in any way?
I honestly have no memory. I'm assuming Dick was there, and my father might have been in the gallery, or maybe they let him on the floor. Was he there? I can't recall, but I'm pretty confident Dick was there. I don't think my dad played any role in things other than just kind of being, proud of the moment. And my wife was definitely there because they then have a little photo op down in the old Senate chamber down in the basement of the Capitol with the then vice president. So I've got one taking the oath with Al Gore, and I got one taking the oath with Dick Cheney. And then your kids are with you. So you get a nice family photo with your spouse and your children. And so I'm pretty confident Dick was there, but I honestly have no memory of it.
Was your father, who obviously was proud of you just for being who you are, let alone the political achievement of winning Secretary of State and then governor twice? I mean, he surely knew as well as anyone how Republican Indiana was at the time. But you were able to serve in, we can gently say, was his Senate seat, something he was certainly remembered by. Was he particularly proud that the Bayh family name was reattached to the United States Senate?
Oh, I think he was. I think he was proud of me as a father would be of a son, and hopefully that would have been the case whether I had done something else with my life in business or law or the military or higher education or anything like that. I think what his hope was that his son would be someone of sound character who was loyal and patriotic and a good father, a good husband, that sort of thing. And the fact that I happened to have some success in politics, was sort of a cherry on the sundae because he liked politics. He spent his life in politics, but I was never one of these people. My father did not lay on me. I think Al Gore's father did on him. You need to go into politics. You're going to be president someday. But no, my father, as a matter of fact, bent over backwards to say, if you're going to do this with your life, you need to understand how hard it is. And you don't need to do this because your father did. And I didn't. So, no, I don't think he ever looked at the Senate seat as being proprietary, but he was sort of, I think, proud of me as a person. And then the fact that it had, I achieved some, high-level political success was just kind of, like I said, a cherry on the sundae.
We should note that Al Gore.
I think as a father, he probably would have been just as proud of me if I'd lost my first election.
We should note that Al Gore's father served in the United States Senate from Tennessee, I believe. Is that correct, Jim? I think that's right.
Yep. Albert Gore.
I've thought about this a lot. Just was kind of an interesting aspect of serving in politics and government, and I've talked about it with other political guests and government elected officials who've come on the Leaders and Legends podcast. But there are certainly what exists, I like to call political trees, and Bob Orr, Mitch Daniels, the list goes on and on. People who serve in a high office, and then the group of people who serve for this elected official go out and strike out and make their mark on their own, whether it's the list goes on and on. You have 2 former chiefs of staff, both of whom served in the Indianapolis mayor's office and including the current one, Joe Hogsett, Fred Glass, Bill Morrow. The list goes on of the people who worked for you, who have either won high office or have served at a high level in other organizations. How proud are you of them and the impact they've had when the genesis of it in some ways was serving in your administration?
Well, I am proud of them, but even more than that, I'm grateful to them because, I tell my sons and anybody else who will listen to me that life is a team sport. It's not an individual sport, and particularly political life is definitely a team sport. So you're not going to be any better than the people you surround yourself with, starting with your spouse, starting with your close associates. And, when I became governor, we hadn't had a Democratic governor in 20 years. And I was 32 when I was elected, 33 when I took office. A lot of the people around me were in their early 30s as well. We hadn't been around the State House very long, and in many cases at all. I actually think it was probably a benefit to me. I didn't know any lobbyists around the State House. I'd been Secretary of State, but nobody lobbies as Secretary of State. So in any event, we were able to take kind of a fresh look at things and, just bright, intelligent, hardworking, idealistic young people who wanted to make a difference and hopefully bring kind of a breath of fresh air to things. And, my budget directors, Frank Sullivan, Gene Blackwell, Kathy Davis, all fantastic. My counsels, David Hamilton, James Stinson, Matt Gutwein, all fantastic. My chiefs of staff, you mentioned the department heads, and they made me successful. And, I am proud of them because we were able to then, and Pam Carter came to Susan's service. She went on to become the first African-American woman attorney general in the nation's history. Joe Modisette ended up being attorney general and also Marion County prosecutor. So there are other, people out there too. And, but first and foremost, they allowed me to be a good governor. And then to the extent that enabled me then to help them go on in their own right to serve the public and to do good things, that makes me happy. But it's, and very often they'll tell me that they're grateful, but as I said, I'm grateful to them because it is not running something like state government in the state of Indiana. That's not something you do by yourself. You got to have a lot of good people, helping you out. And I should have mentioned Ann Delaney, Jim's, good friend as well. I mean, the list goes on and on I could mention, but, I'm proud of them, but I'm also grateful to them.
Last question before we get to the final 5 questions. For years, it was lamented that Indiana's May primary just doesn't ever mean anything. It's never relevant. But in 2008, it was very relevant in the Democratic Party as Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton faced off for the nomination. And Indiana played a critical role in that campaign as it wound down. A, was it hard to choose someone to endorse? And B, did you get a thrill out of the fact that finally Indiana was relevant on a presidential level?
Well, yes to both questions. So to the last one, I mean, it's too bad that our state just is very often taken for granted. I mean, everybody knows that for the most part, we're going to vote for the Republican in the fall, so they don't pay any attention to us then. And usually the nominee is already selected by the time the primary rolls around. So, I mean, it would be in the best interest of Hoosier citizens to have an earlier primary, or if the two national parties decided to rotate dates, something like that. I think that most members in the General Assembly aren't interested in changing the date because they wouldn't want to be dealing with the primary while they're sitting there in Indianapolis in a legislative session. And I get that. But you could, have the presidential thing one time and their race is another. It might cost you a little money, but if it was in the best interest of our state so that the issues that are important to us and our voices were heard more vigorously, then I think it would be a good thing to do. So, yeah, that was great. And it also actually, people asked me how Barack Obama carried the state of Indiana that fall. Well, one of the reasons was the primary. He made 43 campaign appearances in the primary. I don't remember the exact figure, but he spent $10, $15, $20 million in television advertising in the primary. And it was all positive, right? Hillary and he weren't, hacking on each other. So he was able to introduce himself in a vacuum to people on the airwaves and to personally be present all over the state. Now, he ended up not winning the primary by 2%, but it actually helped him win the fall election. I think he ended up winning by like 1% or something like that. So you could argue, I think, pretty persuasively that if it hadn't been for the primary, he would have succeeded in the fall. In terms of choosing a candidate, yeah, I usually don't get involved in primaries. And but in that case, I had just been friendly with Bill and Hillary Clinton for a long time. He'd been the youngest governor, then I was the youngest governor. And, I just, had a personal relationship with them. And I'm just one of those people that, as I said, normally I wouldn't get involved, but it was a former close staff member of mine or someone that was just a good friend, well, then I'm willing to put political calculation aside and, support my friend. And so that's what I did. It was the only state that year, and all 50 of them, where one of the candidates started off ahead but didn't win. Barack Obama started off 8 points ahead, and Hillary Clinton won our state by 2. And so, that was quite an experience.
We had Kip too and Murray Clark on the Leaders and Legends podcast, and we talked about that 2008 race because Kip was obviously heavily involved. And he said exactly the same thing that you said. Jim, do you want to weigh in real quick on that primary?
Well, it's something that we have never seen in Indiana before, and I anticipate we won't see again. I still remember the crowds that showed up for both Hillary and Barack Obama. But as the senator said, 43 campaign visits is just unheard of, and I believe Obama made 49 by the time November got here. And, in a state that was believed to be strongly Republican, to see somebody in that circumstance win Indiana, I think it's still hard to believe looking back.
Well, it was a unique set of circumstances. You had the primary, which enabled our eventual nominee to be introduced to the people of our state personally and over the airwaves in a very positive, very extensive way. John McCain was a friend of mine, and I admire John, but he was probably not the best presidential candidate in that particular year. Made one campaign stop. I think it was the weekend before in Indiana. And as you mentioned, Jim, Barack Obama made another 6. So I think continued to just dramatically outspend the Republicans in terms of television advertising, direct mail, all that stuff. Made a huge difference because the national Republicans probably rightfully concluded, hey, if we got to spend money in Indiana, we're toast. So we'll just take a chance on losing Indiana to put the money into other places. And then finally, in that first campaign, then Senator Obama was able to present himself as a moderate candidate who favored cutting taxes for the middle class and some other things that would resonate pretty well with swing voters in Indiana. And, a combination of all those things and the fact he's just an enormously talented political figure enabled him to carry our state by, I think, like 0.5%. I remember the final campaign event. I campaigned with him in Lafayette, Terre Haute, my hometown. The final campaign event was up there, I was saying Wicker Park in Lake County, and they must have had 45,000, 50,000 people there. It was quite the event. So it was, people say, well, winning Indiana is possible, but you kind of go through the analysis and it is possible, but it took a confluence of some pretty, of some factors that are, as you point out, Jim, unlikely to reoccur.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that you'd have to be a pretty hardcore partisan not to acknowledge that Barack Obama's 2008 campaign was less of a campaign and more of just a phenomenon. It was just unreal.
Hope and change.
One of the key factors was that during that primary, they had all sorts of staff here, and they collected contact information for thousands and thousands of voters, and they used email in ways that other campaigns haven't. So the presence that they had in the spring really made a difference in the fall electronically, if no other way.
Yeah, no, that was one of the great political successes in modern Indiana political history. Them carrying it hadn't happened since LBJ, and LBJ won every state but like 4 or 5. So, hats off to everyone who was involved in that.
We've reached the point in the Leaders and Legends podcast where we ask the same 5 questions of all of our guests. Governor Evan Bayh, are you ready?
Fire away. If I'm not ready now, I guess I never will be.
Well, the easier questions than you ever got from Shella, that's for sure.
Huh.
Number 1, what was your first job?
Well, when I was a teenager, I worked construction a few summers, and my parents were both from farming backgrounds, and so they felt that hard physical labor would be good for me, and it was. It convinced me that getting a good education was probably a valuable thing to do. So I worked construction, laid railroad track one summer, did just general construction work around a housing development another summer. But then as an adult, after I finished my law degree, my first job was there in the federal building in Indianapolis. It's now named for my dad. It wasn't in those days, but I clerked for a wonderful man, federal judge named James Noland. So that was my first job out of school. But my first jobs all involved, kind of construction, heavy labor kind of things.
Second question, what was your first concert?
Well, that's a good question. This is going to date me a little bit. The first concert I can remember going to in high school was probably, I think, the Allman Brothers Band. And then there were a couple others.
That's pretty good.
Yeah, well, they were good. I think that was after Dwayne died, though. So in any event, Dickie Betts kind of picked up the slack from then on. When I was down at IU, this is really going to date me. I think they had an Earth, Wind, and Fire show. And who else? I remember going to see, I'm going to see Dan Fogelberg was in a smaller, Earth, Wind, and Fire was in Assembly Hall. I think Dan Fogelberg was in a smaller venue down there. And I think that was back in the day when John Mellencamp went by a little bit different. He went by his full name, but if you could catch John is just great live. And back then, he was kind of a work in progress. And if you could catch him at one of the local places around town, that was always a good show too.
Greg Ballard's first concert was Sly and the Family Stone on Bloomington's campus.
I saw them when I was in high school too.
Number 3.
See, Jim, all this stuff about me you never asked.
I didn't ask any of that.
Hey, and for the Republicans who were bitching that Shella doesn't ask Evan Bayh hard questions, we should know that we can see Jim's office here on Zoom, and the Sagamore he has on his wall is signed by Evan Bayh. Would you like to comment on that, Shella?
Well, I just said if you point that out, I do have to point out I've got 2 others, but I'm still.
But he throws darts at that one. So. So we got to get on with these questions, but one of my favorite things was it appeared in Time magazine. So the Rolling Stones, which I like the Rolling Stones, they were doing a concert at, I think it was the RCA Dome, whatever it was called back in the day. And so I went, and they had a little thing in Time magazine. It said, when the Rolling Stones played in Indianapolis, the governor, the Speaker of the House, who was Paul Manweiler at that time, and the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, who was Randy Shepard, said the governor, the Speaker of the House, and the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court were all in attendance, and all were younger than Mick Jagger.
I was there too.
Were you younger than Mick Jagger?
I still am.
Number 3, if you could suggest any book for someone to read, which book would you recommend?
Gosh, whenever you've been through a difficult time in your life, it makes you a little reflective about the nature of life and all that sort of thing. So I spend a little time with the New Testament. I think that always kind of puts life in perspective. And then I love biographies and I love history. Ulysses S. Grant, when he was dying, wrote an autobiography called Grant, and it's a great read. And there's a recent biography of Thomas Jefferson, I think, is very balanced. Came out when my wife got sick. So I had read the first few chapters and then put it down and didn't pick it up again until she passed. But it's called Thomas Jefferson, Architect of American Liberty. And that's an excellent read too. So Harry Truman once said that the only thing about the future that we do not know is the history we've forgotten. And that's not entirely true. Somebody else said history doesn't repeat itself, but it does rhyme. And so I'd say read as much history as you can and read as much of the lives of great men and women as you can and learn from them about what went well and also what didn't.
Next question's right up your alley then. If you could witness any event in history, be there in person as it happens, which event would you choose?
Well, there are a whole lot, they're just a whole lot, but I'd say I'll pick Normandy landings. And the reason for that is mankind came very close to being controlled by an evil despot and political ideology that was just abhorrent to everything that we in our country believe in, sanctity of life, human dignity, individual freedom, all that. And an entire continent was for several years overrun by just, by fascism, Nazism, all that kind of thing. And so the Russians bore the brunt of all that. But when we landed in France there, and to any of your listeners, if you haven't been to the American Cemetery in Normandy, if you have a chance, you should go. I got there with my wife and my two young sons. I think they were, 11 or 12 at the time. And it's just the sun was going down. They were closing the place up. And we just walked through the rows of crosses and stars of David, 18, 19, 20-year-old young men who willingly went to sacrifice themselves for their country and hopefully what our country stands for. And there is no more noble thing than that. And so we should honor them. And I think I'd pick that.
My advice would be to take your tissues. You're going to need them. Last question. If you could have dinner with anyone living today, 2 hours off the record, just to chat, whom would you choose?
Oh, wow. Anyone. Well, there's so many there, but, well, if one of my sons would actually tell me what they were really thinking, I'd pick one of them. But, 25-year-old young men can be kind of taciturn. Maybe they shared more things. They're both wonderful sons, and we love each other dearly, but I think maybe they shared more about their lives with their mom than they have so far with me. But putting all that aside, I'd say Xi Jinping, the president of China, with the understanding that somebody had put sodium pentothal in his tea, and he would tell me what he was really thinking, because I think the next half century is going to be defined by two things. At least our place in the world is going to be defined by two things. One is China, and the other is technology. And increasingly, those two things are overlapping. The Chinese they have a plan to try and dominate 5 or 6 key technologies, the Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and some other areas, 5G. And we're going to be challenged. And so getting some real insight into what they really think and what they really plan and how far they're willing to go and what they really think of us. By the way, I think they don't think much of us. They think we're a declining power. And they look at all of our internal divisions and they just think that that's our weakness. And so maybe the last thing I'll say is that should serve as a wake-up call for all of us, because there's no doubt in my mind that we can compete with the Chinese. And there's no doubt in my mind, as inventive as we are, that we can compete with them in the area of technology. But we're not going to do that as deeply divided and polarized and hating on each other as we currently are. And so we really have the potential to create a great new future for our nation and for those we love, like my sons. But it ain't going to happen by accident. It's up to us to make it that way. And so I think that is really the challenge facing this generation of Americans is not primarily external. It's internal. And realizing that we have a lot more in common as Americans than we do these superficial things that people are obsessing over. And the final thing I'd mention, I heard Bill Clinton say this once, and I never fact-checked it, but I'm reasonably confident it's true. When they finished mapping the human genome a few years ago, the DNA, what kind of makes us all what we are as Homo sapiens, they discovered that all of us, every one of us, black and white, Republican, Democrat, liberal, conservative, regardless of religion or ethnicity or any of that stuff, we have 98% of our DNA is the same. And yet we end up obsessing over the other 2% so much. Some of that's understandable. Some of that's necessary. But boy, we got to find a way to come together as Americans and human beings because we got a common destiny. And it's not going to be what it should be if we're fighting amongst ourselves the way we currently are. So I view the primary challenge to America today as being internal.
You have been listening to Leaders and Legends, a podcast presented by Veteran Strategies, a local veteran public relations enterprise, and sponsored by Girl Scouts of Central Indiana, Garmon Construction, Leaders and Legends LLC, the Grand Hall and Conference Center at Historic Union Station, the McGinley's Golden Ace Inn, and McAllister Machinery, your friendly neighborhood Caterpillar dealer. Along with co-host Jim Shella, our guest today has been former Indiana governor and United States Senator Evan Bayh. Thank you so much for your time. It was absolutely a delight and an honor to get a chance to talk with you.
Robert, my pleasure. Good luck to you and Jim.
Thank you very much for listening to Leaders and Legends, brought to you by Veteran Strategies Incorporated. If you want to contact us about this program or our menu of public relations services, please send us an email at robert@veteranstrategies.com. That's robert@veteranstrategies.com.